Hi, and it's Kevin Wright back again with another property finance tip. What's the discussion this week? Well, we're going to look at something that's pretty popular in property this week, and it's rent to rent. So this is where you don't buy the property, but you rent it off a landlord that already owns the property, and then you rent it out again for a profit. Now, my focus this week is why that isn't always such plain sailing as you might think, or as it's made out to be. If you want to find out the real story behind rent to rent, keep watching. Okay, so rent to rent, it's got very popular over the last few years, and there's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. It maybe isn't a long-term strategy because wealth follows assets, and with rent to rent, you don't own the asset, you actually just rent it. And it's become very popular as a low-level entry into property, and it's especially attractive to people that haven't got a big enough deposit to actually start buying investment properties. But the way you execute rent to rent needs a bit of examination because it's not necessarily as it appears on the surface. I'm going to explain why that is from a broker's point of view. So I've spent many years brokering mortgages, bridging loans, development loans, and whatever else. So I can give you the mortgage lender's perspective on rent to rent. Now, possibly this might not have been covered on any rent to rent course that you might have been on. So the first thing is, what contract do you use? Well, you can use a management contract, you can use a corporate contract, or you can use an AST contract. Let's look at those. So an AST is wrong because an AST is an agreement between the owner of the property and the tenant in situ. You're not going to be the tenant in situ, you're going to rent it out to the tenants in situ. So an AST contract would be the wrong agreement for a rent to rent. So ASTs are the wrong contract to use in a rent to rent scenario. What about corporate lets? Well, corporate let means that the employees of a company are going to live in the property. Now, if you're going to do it like an HMO and you're going to rent it out to disparate tenants, corporate let is also the wrong contract to use. So the third one was a management contract. So effectively, you're acting similarly to a letting agent and you're tenanting the property. So it's important to use the right contract. Now, what about mortgages? Because this is a big thing and this is a barrier to doing rent to rent, but doing it correctly. Let me explain to you how mortgage lenders view this. So you're either going to find a landlord that's got a mortgage or they haven't got a mortgage. Now, it's more problematic potentially. They have got a mortgage. They haven't got a mortgage, none of this applies. But if they have got a mortgage, you need to understand what mortgage they've got. Unless they've already been renting it out as an HMO to multiple tenants, it's likely they've got a mainstream buy-to-let mortgage. Now, mainstream buy-to-let mortgages are quite limited, and they're limited in terms of what they allow you to do. So there are three criteria with a buy-to-let mortgage. Well, there's loads, but there's three relevant ones that we're talking about here. So the first is it covers the term of the letting agreement, and standard buy-to-let mortgages say minimum 6 months, letting term maximum 12 months. Now, if you're going to do, let's say, a 3-year management contract with the landlord to rent their property for them, your management contract, because it's longer than 12 months, has breached the landlord's mortgage conditions. It also needs to be an AST. That's the only type of letting agreement a standard buy-to-let mortgage lender allows. You're not doing an AST. So that's a breach of the mortgage lender's contract. And thirdly, the contract needs to be between the owner of the property and the tenant in situ, but it's with you and you're not living there. So that's a breach of standard buy-to-let mortgage lender's terms and conditions. Now, what does this mean? If it means that your landlord, your property owner, has a standard buy-to-let mortgage, you cannot legitimately lease it out on a rent-to-rent contract. And if you do so, you're helping the landlord to breach his lender's terms and conditions. And how might that play out? Well, you may never get found out. But if you do, the mortgage lender will send your landlord what they call a cease and desist letter. So this is stop breaching our terms. And if you don't stop breaching our terms, we're going to repossess your property. Now, that's a scary thing for a landlord to get. Now, you may conclude that actually then, if a landlord that wants to do a rent-to-rent deal with you has got a standard buy-to-let mortgage, it's going to be very difficult for you transparently and legitimately to enter into a contract and agree with him that you're going to rent his property and then rent it out yourself to multiple tenants, which is the standard way that rent-to-rent works. So how can you make rent to rent work safely from the landlord's and any mortgage point of view? Well, the simplest way to do it without any comeback at all is to just focus on landlords that don't have mortgages. That's a very simple solution, isn't it? But if they have got a mortgage, then they've got to have typically an HMO mortgage or a specialist mortgage that allows them to do that. Unless they've already been renting it out like that way, they won't have that. And that's going to cost them a higher rate of interest than they're probably paying right now on their buy-to-let mortgage. The question to ask yourself is, if the landlord is going to do this legitimately, they've got to remortgage, pay a valuation fee, pay legal fees, pay an arrangement fee on the mortgage, and most likely get a higher rate of interest than what they've got now to be able to have the right mortgage so that you can rent the property out. And it may even be they need to get a commercial mortgage. So the real question is, if your landlord knows everything that they need to do to be compliant, are they going to incur that cost? Possibly, probably they won't. So the simplest way clearly to make rent to rent work for you is just to deal with landlords that don't have mortgages. Now granted, they're harder to find, but if you don't do that, you might think you've got a great income that you built up with, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 10 landlords. You're breaking their mortgage terms, but it's built on sand really, isn't it? Because that can all come crashing down if the lenders find out. So there we have it. This week is about how to do rent to rent properly. I'll be back with another property finance tip next week. In the meantime, hang around because I want you to see this. Thanks for watching this video. And if you enjoyed it, come spend some more time with me. Come check out my property finance masterclass. Click the link here, go check it out.